Good afternoon, everybody. I've been working in academic libraries for nearly 17 years now, and this is the first time I've ever attended ANSL, so I'm really pleased to be here, and I'm really pleased to be talking, and I chose a really good year to come after listening to this morning's keynote, so I'm really glad this is the one I chose to come to. I joined Maynooth University just over 2 years ago, and I suppose the timing of my arrival was quite serendipitous because the university was undergoing a massive amount of change around the time that I joined. The university had launched a very ambitious strategic plan that was not without serious challenges when it came to implementing it, and what I'm talking about today is around one of those challenges. But having said that, I think it's fair to say that the strategic plan has been a success. As you may or may not have heard, we are Ireland's fastest growing university, which is our tagline at the moment. And our BA course is now the most popular option on CAO, and a lot of that is a direct impact of what I'm going to talk about today. So what I am talking about is our new undergraduate curriculum, and which has this key focus on critical skills, but there's a lot more to the undergraduate curriculum than just this focus on critical skills. So the first main idea of it was to try and reduce all these entry points, so we have much fewer entry points on the CAO for students when they're applying to come to Maynooth, which makes it a lot simpler and easier for them. What the university did is when looking at the undergraduate curriculum and how it can be improved is that actually went out and spoke to people in the community, in the workplace, and to guidance counsellors in schools, and tried to identify what is it that students need, what do our graduates need, not just to be successful graduates, but successful employees and successful citizens as well, which, as I talk a bit more, has become more and more relevant in the world that we're living in at the moment. So these are the critical skills that have been identified as a key part of our undergraduate curriculum that every Maynooth student will acquire while they're in university. So they include things like problem-solving skills and critical thinking skills, but also having an ethical responsibility and having the ability to do things like reflect and analyse. And so, as I said, this was all happening around the time that I started in Maynooth, and I sat down and looked at this and was thinking, how can the library be involved? Where can we place ourselves strategically? And it just kind of screamed out at me when I was looking at these that every single one of these are connected to information literacy. So you can't search for information properly if you don't know how to problem solve. You can't evaluate information if you don't know how to reflect and analyse. You can't cite and avoid plagiarism without understanding your ethical responsibility around information. So it just seemed a very obvious kind of connection for us. So, and then on top of that, as well as identifying what the curriculum would deliver, Maynooth also created this set of what they call graduate attributes, and this is basically what we will say the qualities of every Maynooth student that would set them apart when they leave university. And one of them is that Maynooth students are expected to be capable of gathering and critiquing information from a variety of sources. I don't know why they didn't say are expected to be information literate, because that's basically what it means. So these two really key, strong pieces of strategic evidence within the university that made me just think, right, this is our opportunity. This is what we do. This is our chance for the library to be heard, and something that is really, really important for what the university is doing. I was just thinking about this talk last night, and I was watching that horrendous Trump press conference last night, and I was thinking, it actually, I've used this slide quite a lot in talks to talk about how this was an opportunity for us to be heard, but actually I think it's probably a bit more important than that. So I was thinking last night, information has always been a really powerful tool, which we know as librarians, but it's actually being used as a weapon now in the political world. If you don't like a fact, let's just call it fake. And it's just really interesting how important these skills are all of a sudden becoming. Well, they're always important, but how aware we are of it. So really, as librarians and as the kind of experts on campus in this area, it really is our ethical responsibility to make sure the university understands what our role is and make sure we're effective in doing it. So this is what a Maynooth education looks like, and this is what kind of goes out in the promotional bump, basically. So these are the 4 aspects of what the curriculum will do. So as well, as I said, as having critical skills, there's a big emphasis on what we call experiential learning, so learning outside of the classroom, in workplaces and voluntary placements, things like that. Students have the choice of choosing a very broad subject areas or choosing to go very narrow and deep at an early stage. And they have kind of interesting combinations. They can combine a foreign language with pretty much anything. So the idea is it would give them these 4 elements, that they would have deep knowledge and critical intellectual skills, that they would be autonomous and responsible learners with a breadth of perspective, and still have those skills for life and work. So before I kind of rocked up with my pitch on why the library needs to be involved and what we can do, I really felt we needed to kind of get ourselves in order, and we really needed to prepare ourselves so we could really present a very coherent kind of view of what the library could do. So the library in Maynooth has always done really great work around information literacy, but there was never really a kind of strategy pulling it all together, and what I wanted to do was create some kind of a framework that we can build on. And bearing in mind we are in a university context, to actually have our practice based on quality research and best practice out there, because it's so important to talk the language that the people you're trying to work with are talking. So we decided that we would look at the other frameworks out there. Maynooth is a Connaught library, and Connaught libraries had adopted the ANZIL standards about kind of 10 or 15 years ago, which are kind of rapidly becoming out of date now, to be honest. So we decided to look at what might work best for Maynooth. And we looked at all the main standards out there, the new ACRL framework, we looked at the new curriculum for information literacy, the SCONAL standards, and ANZIL as well. And I won't go into too much detail about this, but what we found is there were bits from the ACRL framework and bits from the new curriculum for information literacy that really worked for us, so we created a blended framework, and we worked together as a team trying to pull that together. So, and what we identified and what we presented then to the kind of academic community was that in order to kind of achieve our graduate attributes and for students to have those skills when they leave university, they really should have what we call 5 key competencies. These competencies shouldn't be achieved in any kind of a linear way. Different people come into university with different skill sets, different experience, and they have different needs at different times. But by the time they finish, they should have gone through all of this. So they have to manage the transition and become an independent learner. They need to be able to map and evaluate an information landscape, be able to research within a discipline. They need to manage and present information and understand the ethical and social dimensions of that information. So what we did then was we took the wheel of what the Maynooth education is, and we planted our 5 competencies on top of that. And this was really key. This really helped us. Like when you hand someone's work back to them as best practice, they normally listen. So the academics really responded to this. So we were saying, in order to be an autonomous and responsible learner, they're going to have to manage that transition from secondary school because they've come from a very different world, and they have to understand the kind of ethical and social dimensions of the information world that they live in. If they're going to have a breadth of perspective, they need to be able to map their information landscape. If they're going to have skills for life and work, they have to be able to manage and present information. And if they're going to have that deep and critical intellectual skills, they need to be able to research within the disciplines. And to be honest, we could have modelled these around, and a lot of the competencies would have matched different parts of the Maynooth education. But really what we wanted was something very clear and obvious for the academics to kind of go, okay, understand what it is that you're trying to do. So it really worked. And then the library was invited to kind of join the critical skills team, which there were lots of different teams involved at kind of taking the strategic plan and putting it into practice on the ground. So I represented the library in this group, and to be perfectly honest, I thought this is great. We're here now, we're at the table, and all we've got to do is go and do what we need to do. So in the group along with me was the director for the Centre of Teaching and Learning. We had discipline experts from each of our 3 faculties, which are social science, arts and humanities and science and engineering. We had someone from the Writing Centre, and then there was me as well. And so the way critical skills is the idea for how it's implemented into the curriculum is there will be 3 critical skills modules that any first year can take. So 2 of them are subject-based. So one of them is called globalization, and one of them is called Great Ideas That Change the World. And those 2 modules will have guest lecturers every week who come and give a kind of almost like a keynote talk, and they try and get some of the most kind of eminent lecturers on campus to really engage first years from the beginning. And then they have seminars following up. And rather than talking so much about the subject content, but really trying to use the subject content to help students develop certain skills such as critical thinking, problem solving, all those skills. And then the 3rd module is called Universal Critical Skills, which doesn't have the lecture format, and we use different very innovative teaching techniques within the classroom to deliver those skills. And I'm going to talk a little bit about more what we do in Universal Critical Skills in a minute. So, as I said, it seemed quite simple. I was part of this team. It was quite high level. The library was really in a great position, and the conditions for collaboration in the university were all perfect. So we were having this seismic shift in the curriculum, which means you change is happening, and change is a great time to kind of get involved in things. There's a real emphasis on interdisciplinary learning, lots of modules shared between departments and faculties. So that collaboration is just necessary for that to happen. The university, as with all 3rd level institutions, was suffering from resource scarcity. So if somebody was willing to put up their hands and say, I'll help you out with that, you were usually really, really appreciative of that, and they would be welcome. And then this tangible, articulated commitment to information literacy, and us being the kind of campus experts on that, it all just seemed so obvious. But to be honest, I was a little bit naive. It was a real challenge sitting around the table with those people. And it became really obvious to me that the people I was in the room with, they really don't do this very often. They're very much within their own kind of discipline world, and they work with people just like them and work on projects in a relatively narrow window all the time. And all of a sudden, there was a musician there trying to work with an engineer, and it was really interesting to watch. And we had quite a few challenges. So I would say the biggest challenges that we faced were this idea of content versus skills. The purpose of these 3 modules was not to deliver subject content. It was to help develop students' skills in the areas that were identified as real gaps by all our stakeholders. So basically the content was really just a vehicle, and to give students some kind of real world context about what they were doing, so it wasn't all kind of theoretical to them. And a lot of my academic colleagues just couldn't, they were just, especially when it came to assessment, it had to be about assessing the content. That was a real challenge for us. And then there was this issue of letting go. This is like for all first years across the university. As I said, our numbers are growing really rapidly, and that's where the numbers are growing, our first year intakes. None of us could go in and deliver the bit that we were expert about, because we just didn't have capacity to do it. We had to bring in tutors and other people and train them and have faith in them. And I have to say the library struggles with this a lot as well. So just because we're the experts on campus in information literacy doesn't mean we have to deliver every information literacy class on campus. In fact, we do really basically no teaching on these modules. We do training days with the tutors, and they do the delivery. And that's much better for the students because it's in context of what they're doing. They have continuity. The tutor can kind of link in things they've been doing in earlier classes in the semester, and it makes a lot more sense. But it's difficult for librarians. But even if we wanted to go into the classroom and do every single session, we simply wouldn't have the manpower to do it. So it wasn't just the academics that had that problem. I would say that we had that problem as well. And then this idea of compromise. If we're including so much and it's such a varied, dynamic course, you can't have every single thing on your wish list in it. You're going to have to let some things go. And a lot of us struggled with that as well. So at times, it kind of felt like we were constantly going around in circles at quite a lot of those meetings. And then I spoke to, a lecturer was appointed to be the critical skills coordinator in the Centre of Teaching and Learning, and I had a conversation with him about our new framework that I was talking about with our 5 competencies. And suddenly the conversation opened up, and we were able to start talking about connecting information literacy to those other critical skills, as I was talking about a minute ago, and how we could really truly embed information literacy into the content and the assessment. Not now the librarian's going to come in and do the session, or now the tutor's going to do the session the librarian put together, but how, like, every week is about some part of information literacy, because information literacy is connected to every single one of those skills. And it was a kind of one of those light bulb moments. It was great, and I realised I was very lucky. He completely understood what information literacy was, what I was talking about, what we were trying to achieve. We were totally on the same page. So now there was 2 of us that could kind of start to drive this forward, and that's what happened. The 2 of us really started to drive it forward and start writing the content. And then this occurred to me, and I was probably naive not to realise it before, but as librarians, this is what we do, like particularly in a university. I know my colleagues, Frank and Pauline, were talking earlier on about, advocacy is one of the biggest things that we have to do. We are constantly out there on campus talking to, on any given day, I could be dealing with one of the deans, a very senior academic. I could also be talking to the head of campus security about an issue we'd had with students. I could be talking to someone from maintenance because the revolving door isn't working, talking to someone from IT because the library management system is giving problems. You just we do this, we deal with just very different people all the time about different things, because we do so many different things within the library. And so doing that, you kind of learn how to listen and understand their needs. And any of us who kind of have worked on reference desks, that's what you do as well. And it never occurred to me that everyone else on campus might not have that same range of skills. And I think it was really beneficial for the group as a whole to actually have brought in a librarian, and it worked really well. And then while we were myself and the critical skills coordinator were kind of struggling with this, he walked into my office one day with this journal article that he found for me, which was called The Art of War for Librarians. And it was all about the role of librarians in curriculum reform. And I thought, how brilliant that he's found this and I haven't found it. And he brought it in to me. And it's on my reference list at the end here. It's by Ken Kempke, I think his name is. And it's really, really interesting article about how librarians have to take any sort of curriculum reform and put themselves right at the centre of it. You can't be shy, and you can't kind of hide under your ladder and go, please can I be involved? You have to make yourself indispensable. It's the only way. And he talks about how to use some of the kind of theories and strategies in the art of war as a librarian trying to work with academics. It's definitely worth a read. I recommend anyone who's going through any sort of big change on a university campus to have a read of it. So now we are heavily involved in participating in the design, the delivery and the assessment of the critical skills modules, and I'll give you a few examples of some of the things we do. So this week actually we did our filter bubbles class. I have to say I was lucky enough late last year to travel to an Irish librarian colleague who now works in Vermont, United States, Alan Carberry. Some of you may know him or be familiar with his work. And the college he works in, their curriculum is very similar to ours, except they're about 8 or 9 years ahead of us. So I went to learn how they do it. And I sat in on this class they did on filter bubbles. And they show this TED Talk from 2011 by Eli Praiser talking about filter bubbles, which is now, of course, all over the news. This is just before it hit the news. And I just thought it was a brilliant way to engage students in how to evaluate information instead of kind of going through the crap checklist and all that kind of stuff. So now that's what we do. We show them this TED Talk, and then we have a conversation about what do they see in their Facebook feed and how many people disagree with them on their Facebook feed. And then we get them to remove all the cookies off their phone and everyone do a search. So what we did this week is we used the topic of tea. So one group of students Googled all the different countries they could think of that were associated with tea, and another Googled different flavours. I can't remember what another one was asked to Google political parties, and then they all Googled tea. So the ones that Googled political parties got stuff about the Boston Tea Party and about American politics, and the ones that had Googled flavours had got information about different flavours or work like that. It was just a really simple, clear example. So that's the kind of things we do in the classroom. And I was really interested in that particular topic, so I asked could I sit in, but it was the tutors that led it. I literally just sit in and join the conversation. And we were talking about there is a court case at the moment that someone who was, whose child was killed by someone who was a white supremacist who'd kind of been heavily influenced by the searches they found on Google, and because Google kept responding to their searches, was actually sending them all this extra information, is suing Google around it. And we had a really interesting conversation whether that was right or wrong, and how would that apply if you replace Google with the public library, and what would they find, and would we shove information in people's face in the same way, like tailor it in the same way. It was really interesting. I'm not convinced either way yet after the conversation. So students really learn to think for themselves and think these things through, and even if you don't agree with them, at least they're actually starting to engage and they see what's going on in the world and the direct impact that it's having. So this is another project that we do in class where they all become Wikipedia editors, and they have to become knowledgeable enough in a subject. This is one of their pages where they have to write the Wikipedia entry for it. And then they have to go to maybe another similar Wikipedia entry, and they need to look at the list of references and can go into the Summon library search in Maynooth and compare what they get from Summon to what they get on Wikipedia. Sometimes the list on Wikipedia is better than what they get from Summon. It's really interesting, but it's a really good exercise for them to kind of learn how to evaluate information. And then just finally, the project they're working at the moment, which is their capstone project, Brian, the critical skills lecturer, came to me and said, I don't know, have you ever heard of this thing, the ACRL framework? And I was like, yes, Brian, we've talked about it before, but that's okay. I have heard of it. He's like, I really like these frames, and I think what I'm going to get the students to do for their capstone project is to pick a frame and then pick a critical skill that they think they've developed over the academic year and put it through that frame and make a poster doing that. And I thought, oh my God, this is amazing. This is just the holy grail. And he came up with it. So this is actually directly lifted out of the assignment that the students were all handed 2 days ago in class, which I was absolutely thrilled with. So I really feel we really kind of made a breakthrough in what students are doing here. And I have to say a huge amount of it is down into this kind of sociable role that we can play in the library. If we hadn't got ourselves into those meetings and we hadn't been able to be the person to connect people together, I don't know if we would have been as successful as we are kind of embedding information literacy in what we do. So I don't think I ever really kind of put as much stock before in the role, those kind of skills that we have. But they're really, really valuable, and it really paid off for me in this project. Thank you. Thank you, Joanna.
And the kind of high-level strategic thing, and then right down to the examples you gave there, it sounds brilliant. I'm interested to know, you're an advocate for the library as you're out and about around the college. Do you think there's ways that we can, because you're very senior, is there ways that we can encourage all library staff at all levels to do that advocacy piece for the library in different ways, or what might that look like?
Yeah, I think and sometimes it's challenging because some people are naturally feel very comfortable doing that kind of thing and some people don't, and you kind of have to understand and accept that. First of all, I think it's really important to kind of lead by doing, so I try and do it as much as I can, and also to be as supportive of it as you can. Kind of go with people at first to do it, but also don't kind of go, well, why is their desk empty for 3 hours? Because actually it's not because they're skiving off, they're actually doing their work. So I think we all need to be seen to do it as much as possible. We have a coffee shop in our building, and that really helps as well, because a lot of people are like, oh yeah, well, just come to instead of having to come for a meeting to the library, you could just pop out to the coffee shop. It's great to get out into their buildings, but the coffee shop in our library is a great start for it as well. So yeah.
Into the
Do you mean teach the academics the skills or get them to understand what information literacy actually is?
Well, I suppose both, as in they might have thought about the term before, but once we've explained the term, did you find that some of the academics, whereas they may have had subject-specific skills that they just haven't thought about some aspect of it, and maybe that the tutors who are teaching had to learn a lot themselves before they could teach it.
So the tutors who were teaching were specifically employed to work on these modules, so that they would have been asked about that in their interviews. So we were lucky in that our tutors kind of grasped or were open to the concept of what we were doing. The bit I talked about earlier on in my presentation about taking what the university had designed as the curriculum and kind of planting information literacy on top of that was really, really effective. And the kind of the people, the influencers, the people that make the decisions around these things, they were convinced, and that's the best place to start. I would say some of them are probably still skeptical. I'm also very lucky in that Brian, the critical skills coordinator, he's a champion for what we do. I would say he'd make a really good librarian as well. They might not have appointed somebody who understood information literacy in that way. So we were very, very lucky. So there was a lot of luck involved in it. I would say some of them are still skeptical. I mean, some of them were skeptical about the curriculum changes as a whole, not just around critical skills. One thing you do hear a lot is, we do this anyway, our students get this anyway, but yet when they go out into the workplace, employers are saying, but they don't have the skills you're saying they have. So it's kind of a difficult one, and I think what's probably silenced most of the criticism is how unbelievably popular. They're optional, and something like 2/3 of first years chose to take these modules on top of what they're doing in their subjects because they identified that they're skills that they need, and that's kind of difficult to argue with, really. So it was probably more controversial a year ago than it is now.
Lorna, that's really good. I just want to know, have you seen a change in type of questions that students are coming to you as a reference desk since this curriculum?
That's a really good question, and I actually probably wouldn't be best placed to answer that because I'm not at the desk, and also the critical skills only went on mainstream this academic year, so I think it's probably too early to tell. I think, and I was at a meeting, we were talking about this recently, when this first year get to graduate, it will be very, very interesting to see how you've got all undergraduate years doing critical skills, how that impacts how people use the library and what they ask in the library. I think it's probably too early to draw any real conclusions now, but it's definitely something we need to kind of keep a track of, I think.
All right, thanks, Maynooth University.
Thank you.